Hello everyone, welcome to UPSC Economics by Rohit Lal. So in today's video, we're going to discuss the organizations of OPEC, OPEC Plus, and we also going to discuss the recent news which is about UAE leaving the groupings of OPEC and OPEC Plus. So let's start with the basics and understand what OPEC or the organization of OPEC actually is. So if you talk about OPEC, OPEC is basically a collection, or it's an organization which is a coalition of key oil producing nations. And what these oil producing nations do is that they coordinate their policies so as to affect the supply of crude oil globally and correspondingly the prices of crude oil globally. The way these OPEC members do is that they decide on different production quotas for countries which are member of OPEC, and thereby by setting production quotas they are able to effectively control the supply of oil globally and correspondingly the prices of oil globally. Another important thing is that OPEC is an abbreviation for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So that is the full form of OPEC. So the way OPEC affects the prices and supply of crude oil is that, let's say OPEC has decided on certain amount of production quotas for different countries. Now if OPEC decides to say that, let's say every country should reduce the amount of crude oil they are producing, so the supply of crude oil would reduce. Now if the demand of crude oil is the same but the supply has reduced, so you would have demand which is more than the supply. Now in any situation we know the basics that if there is more demand compared to supply, the prices are going to increase. So this is one way in which OPEC is able to influence the supply and the prices of crude oil. Now if OPEC wants to reduce the prices of crude oil, what it could do is that it could increase the production quotas for different countries which are key members of OPEC. So if there is an increase in supply of crude oil compared to demand, what you would have is that increased availability of crude oil, and if there is more availability than the demand, the prices of crude oil would gradually reduce over time. Now key facts in regards to OPEC is that it was an intergovernmental organization, or it is an intergovernmental organization which is founded in 1960. It has its headquarters in Vienna, Austria, and currently there are 11 members which are members of OPEC after the exit of UAE. So you have Algeria, you have Congo, you have Equatorial Guinea, you have Gabon, you have Iran and Iraq, you have Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. So while typically you're not asked such factual questions, but it's important that you could revise these names 2 or 3 times in case there comes a question which says that which are the countries which are members of the OPEC. While it's a lot factual, but given that this is a new or a recent news development, it's good to know the members of the grouping such as OPEC. Now let's talk about UAE leaving the OPEC. So UAE was the third largest member of the grouping of OPEC. However, from May 1st of 2026, it has decided to leave the grouping. Now the key reason why UAE has decided to leave the grouping is because it feels that the production quotas it is assigned via the OPEC are very low, because what UAE has been doing is that it has been making investments to increase its crude oil production capacity. So it intends to produce as much as 5 million barrels per day, whereas currently its production quota is only of 3.5 million barrels. So it feels that it is not able to capitalize on its ability to produce more crude oil and hence make more profits. Similarly, you had Qatar, which withdrew from OPEC in 2019. So if you talk about in the immediate term, the withdrawal of UAE is not going to significantly impact the global crude oil prices or have repercussions globally, and the reason is that there is already a constrained supply because of the war in Iran. However, in the long run, because UAE was a country which is a key producer or key member of the OPEC, and it was also one of the countries which had the ability to quickly raise its production because it had a decent amount of spare capacity. So in the long run, the exit of UAE is going to weaken the ability of the grouping as a whole to effectively influence the supply and the prices of crude oil globally. So this is the broad concept of OPEC. Now, in addition to OPEC, you have another organization which is the OPEC Plus, and this was formed in 2016. Now, we must understand why was there a need for an emergence of additional organization called the OPEC Plus. So up till 2010 approximately, OPEC as a grouping was effectively able to influence the supply and prices of crude oil globally. However, what you witnessed post 2010 was that you had a shale revolution in US. So once you had a shale revolution in the US, it resulted in a massive increase in supply of crude oil globally, and as a consequence of increased or excessive supply, it started impacting the prices of crude oil globally. So in response to the shale revolution in the US, the OPEC countries decided that they did not want to cut back on the production of crude oil because they felt that they would lose their market share. Additionally, they also felt that because the production of crude oil via drilling using the shale technology or in the shale rocks is expensive, they felt that over time these producers in the US would not be able to compete effectively with the OPEC countries, and as a consequence of which they would be removed from the market. However, this did not happen, and what actually happened was that the price of a barrel of crude oil reduced from $110 in 2014 to as low as $30 in 2016. So as a consequence of this, the OPEC members realized that they need to coordinate with other key major oil producers such as Russia, so that collectively all the oil producing nations are able to control or manage or regulate the supply of crude oil and hence the prices. And hence in 2016 you had the emergence of an organization of OPEC Plus. Now if you talk about OPEC Plus, it includes all the 11 OPEC countries as of now, as well as it includes 10 other non-OPEC members or 10 other key oil producers which are not member of OPEC. So the key or the main or the 10 non-OPEC members are, you have Russia, you have Mexico, you have Kazakhstan, then you have Oman, Azerbaijan, Malaysia, and then you have Bahrain, South Sudan, Brunei and Sudan. So these are the members, non-OPEC members of the grouping of OPEC Plus. So OPEC Plus collectively would now have 21 members. So this is the history and this is the basics of the organization of OPEC Plus. Now how do the groupings of OPEC, OPEC Plus, or what do these groupings have implications when it comes to India? So if you talk about India, we know that we import approximately 85% of our crude oil, and given that we import such a large amount of crude oil, any policies which these key producers make is going to have repercussions for India in three broad ways. So the first way is that changes in crude oil prices or increase in crude oil prices could result in something which is called a cost push inflation. Why? Because if the prices of crude oil increases, it results in an increased cost of transportation and as well as increased production costs. Now, if the input costs increases, producers, in order to keep their margins pretty much the same, are compelled to increase the prices of commodities, and hence you have a cost push inflation. Secondly, if the prices of crude oil increases, and given that we import such a significant amount of crude oil, it would increase the value of imports, and correspondingly, if the value of our imports increase disproportionately compared to the value of our exports, we would have a larger current account deficit. So if the value of our imports is more than the value of our exports, it would increase the amount of current account deficit. And given that we pay for our imports using foreign currencies, so increased demand for foreign currencies compared to the domestic currency would put a pressure on the Indian rupee and would also result in the depreciation of the currency or the depreciation of rupee. The final key broad impact OPEC or a rise in crude oil prices could have on our country is that it could result in an increased fiscal deficit or increased subsidy expenditure for the government, because we import a significant amount of crude oil products, and if the prices increases, the government, if they do not want to pass on these prices to retail consumers like us, they would have to incur additional subsidies. And if government incur additional subsidies, that increases the expenditure of the government. And if the earnings or the revenues of the government stays the same while the expenditure increases, it would result in an increased fiscal deficit for the government. So this could be the broad implication of any action or any policies which OPEC or OPEC plus as a grouping could have on India as a country. So these are the broad concepts we wanted to cover in this video. Hope everything we've covered is clear. Do subscribe to the channel in case you already haven't, and please check out other videos on the channel in regards to current affairs as well as the basics of economics. Thank you so much for watching, and do leave your comments in the comment section in case you have any.